I'm gonna gently pour. Woo! Whoa! It's a cheese curd party. Hey there, I'm Sohla El-Waylly, and this is Ancient Recipes with Sohla. In each episode, we're gonna take a dish you may recognize and attempt to recreate one of the oldest versions of it to ever exist. It's a little history, it's a little cooking, and it's a whole lot of me. What's not to love? In this episode, we're gonna recreate a fossilized bread that was found at Pompeii. Yep, there was carbonized bread found underneath all of the ash. And what goes better with bread than cheese? The Romans weren't the first ones to make bread or cheese, of course, but it will be really cool to recreate a version from Pompeii. We're gonna start by beginning to make the cheese. The Romans worked on and perfected many types of cheese-making techniques, so we're gonna give one a try. So here I have 1 gallon of goat's milk. We've already brought this to a boil and then let it sit for about 15 minutes. You want it to cool off just a little bit. If you bring it to a boil and then just go right in there with the rennet, it's gonna be too hot. The rennet wouldn't be in pill form. That's how you get it nowadays. So I'm gonna use 1 rennet tablet and I'm gonna dissolve it in a little bit of water before adding it to the milk. I like to break it up with my fingers a little bit before adding the water to help it, make it easier to smush. Okay, so here's some tap water. We're gonna add a little splash. You just wanna dissolve it so it incorporates into the milk really easily. I would probably use a little tiny whisk nowadays. They didn't have whisks back then, so we're trying to keep it as ancient as possible, right? It's a little smashy smash with wood-on-wood tools. It's a lot harder without a whisk. Okay, success. Okay, so my milk, it was boiled. It's now cooled just slightly, but it's still pretty warm, and we're gonna add our rennet in. Now, once you add your rennet, mix it up really well and then stop touching it. Okay, now's the point. I'm gonna stop touching it. You don't even wanna move it from the stove. Put it in one area and don't go near it because the curd is gonna start to set now. And if you agitate it too much, you're not gonna have a nice curd. You're gonna end up with cheese that's dry. Too much whey is gonna come out of it. So we're gonna let this stand now for 1 hour. And while that does its thing, we're gonna start making the bread. The bread we're trying to recreate is called Panis Quadratus and has an interesting shape that you can see here from the pictures of the ones found in Pompeii. Some were even found still in the oven. All right, so we're gonna start by dissolving some salt into our water. Oop, just like that. And dissolving the salt into the water like this just makes it a little easier to incorporate. Now we're gonna be making this bread with sourdough starter. That's what they would have back then. They didn't have instant yeast. So this is gonna be totally naturally leavened, which is another reason why it's important to dissolve the salt into the water. If you put salt into your starter, it's just gonna kill it. It'll just be dead before you started. Okay, so here I have some spelt. Now I'm gonna mix this using the well method. So right here on the counter. So we're gonna start by dipping it. Okay, when you're making a well, it's really fun. There's no reason to do it anymore. You could just use a big bowl or a mixer, but sometimes I do it when I want to feel old-timey, So see how I kind of took my time to tip it out into this nice big pyramid? This is gonna make it a little easier to make a nice well with high walls. That's really important. If you don't start out with high walls, it's gonna just rupture and you're gonna have a flood and it's gonna be so sad and such a mess. Spelt is over 5,000-year-old wheat. It's coming back now because everyone's into those ancient grains. Now, check out how high-walled my well is, right? This is good. We're gonna widen it just a little bit. You have to take your time when you're building your well. This initial foundation is gonna make it a lot easier when you get mixing. Okay, now I'm gonna add my sourdough starter right into the middle. I'm not gonna put it all in there just yet. We wanna incorporate this slowly so we don't have massive collapse. Okay, so turn your hands into a fork. All right, and now I'm gonna just gently fork in some of the walls of my spelt and slowly start incorporating the sourdough into the flour. This is gonna get messy, but I think it's a lot of fun. So we're slowly the well is slowly getting wider. I'm slowly mixing some of my flour into my sourdough starter. Now we've got a little more room. I'm gonna add the rest of this. This is gonna get everywhere. But it's cool, okay. Getting it all in there. All right. So we just keep doing this. Slowly, take your time, incorporate the flour into the starter. This is a pretty high hydration dough, so we've got like 2 parts flour to 1 part water, which is gonna give us nice big bubbles, hopefully a nice crust. Spelt has a really nice flavor compared to like modern bread flour, which is, modern flour is great for a lot of things. It's great for fluffy cakes and tender crusts, but it's not the most flavorful, but it does develop gluten really well. Spelt flour, on the other hand, takes a lot more to work it to develop the same amount of gluten as you would with like a modern bread flour. So even though I haven't tried this before, I'm predicting it's not gonna be as like fluffy and tender. It'd probably be more of a dense bread, but we're gonna find out. I feel like it's time to add water. This is where it gets risky and a little scary. But my well is still intact. So yeah, I'm pressing with my fingers against the surface of the counter to make sure that I'm like scraping, kind of like if you were using a dough hook, the way it like scrapes along the sides of the bowl. You're just doing that with your hand. You're turning your hand into a dough hook. Okay, here we go. Fold in more flour in. The well is getting, I should have started it further out. It's getting dangerously close to the edge of the table. But I think that's part of the fun, right? It's a little risky. Let's see what happens here. There was actually over 30 bakeries in Pompeii. Bread was such a big staple of their diet. And that seems like a lot. That seems like a lot of bakeries for one city. I do think it's more bakeries than we have here in Manhattan. Okay, oh gosh, it's getting crazy. Hold on. We're bringing it in. We're coming back. Come back to me. So we're just adding a splash at a time, slowly incorporating it. I think I'm gonna go for all of this water, and then if it looks too wet, I'll add a little more flour back into it. This is a workout for my fingers though. They're doing a great job as forks. Okay. It's a really nice soft dough. So in Pompeii, they would actually bake the bread on the floor of the oven. They did have clay vessels that they would form the bread in, but they didn't actually bake the bread in there. Oh, that's it. Okay, that's the last of the water. So now I'm gonna see how much of this flour we're gonna need. We might not need all of it. That is the cool thing with the well method. When you do it in a stand mixer or just like a bowl and you dump it all together, it's like a one-shot deal. But here, since we're incorporating it slowly, we can kind of gauge how much flour we need. This is probably how they did it back then because they were just making bread by eye. You know, you probably weren't measuring. Okay. I think I'm gonna move into kneading. So I'm gonna try and get this stuff off my fingers into here. I'm gonna clean off my fingers with my other fingers. Okay, here's a fun trick. You take some flour, and the dry flour helps rub the scraps of dough off of you. Now, I find it a little easier to knead my dough if my hands are relatively clean, because the dough on my hands, has some of it's gotten crusty, and if you accidentally get that into your bread, you're gonna have like a crusty chunk of dough. And I think it's gonna be a bit of work. All right, knead. So everyone's got like a different form. Once you get into kneading, you'll figure out what works best for you. But it's like a folding, pressing, stretching situation. I do this push thing with my right hand while I'm pulling forward with my left. Now this is feeling a little wet, so I'm just gonna do this like little sprinkle situation as I go. As you keep kneading, it's gonna get silky and soft. So don't like overdo it with the flour at the beginning, because then you're gonna end up with really dense dough. But I'm doing this like push, turn situation. Push, turn, flip forward, and we're just gonna keep going until it's nice and smooth. You get into a groove and it's really fun. Push, turn, pull, I'm into it. You're gonna get into it. It takes a minute, but it's fun once you get into a nice groove. Everyone has a different kneading form though, so you don't have to follow mine. Find your own kneading rhythm. We are getting nice and smooth. You can see I haven't added much more flour, but it's starting to look less sticky. As you knead, like the starch kind of absorbs that moisture, so that's why it's good to not add too much flour in the beginning. That's how you end up with dry bread. Sometimes, if I've got a high counter, I like to stand on something. Can I stand on something? So this bread ends up in a kind of unique shape. There's a lot of debate over how the shape was made. But some people think that they pressed a wagon wheel into it. because it has these like divots and this center hole that kind of looks just like a wagon wheel. Today we're gonna use a dowel. We're so close, now we're gonna get into it. I'm gonna avoid adding flour. Get out of here, because I want nice texture on this dough. We got lots of flavor going from those extra additions. You can see it's really transforming. Oh, yeah. Okay, this is a little high, so I'm gonna adjust with a little squat and then get a full body workout. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I feel good about that. I don't think that with this dough, I'm gonna get any more smoothness. Okay, returning to my original height. All right, so we got our dough. It's nice and smooth, taut. It's a lot less sticky than it was before, but it's still nice and moist. Now, I'm going to grab this wooden bowl for proofing. Grease it up just a little so it doesn't stick. You could also flour it up, I suppose. But this board looks like it needs some oil anyways. You know, you have to oil your wood, it's alive. It's my favorite thing to do once a month. I sit down, I oil all of my wood. Little oil. Now, we want this to stay in a nice ball. All right, and we're gonna let this proof for an hour and a half to 2 hours until it's almost doubled in size. I'm gonna cover it with a damp cloth just to make sure that we don't form a skin. And I'm gonna take a little break, clean up, and then we're gonna come back and drain our cheese. So, our milk and rennet situation has been hanging out and it has become set, like a curd. You know it's ready when you jiggle it and it moves as one, kind of like a panna cotta or a jello mold. You wanna see a good wiggle, but don't get too aggressive because we want to cut the curd when we wanna cut the curd. We don't want it to just break on us. And I'm gonna use a dagger because I feel like they would use one in Pompeii. So the reason we're gonna cut our curd rather than just breaking it up is we really wanna control the way is released. If you cut this up into lots of itty bitty pieces, too much whey is gonna come out and it's gonna end up really dry. I'm gonna cut like 1-inch squares, kind of a grid. So 1 inch going in one direction, and then we're gonna go in the other direction. So we wanna get like nice big cubes so the whey can drain out slowly and we don't end up with like this really tight, dry cheese. All right, so that's good. And now I'm gonna line a colander with some cheesecloth so we can drain it into here. And I'm just gonna pour my curds in, let them drain. That whey is gonna fall through. All right, I like to start by ladling some so the whole thing doesn't just come out and go splat. And then we're gonna switch to a pour. See how wiggly, jiggly it is? It's just like Jell-O. Okay, I'm gonna switch to a pour. I'm gonna gently pour. Woo! Whoa! It's a cheese curd party. Okay, awesome. So I'm not gonna squish or press or twist or anything right now. We wanna let the curds initially just drain on their own. So we're gonna set this aside for 1 hour. If you start like wringing it out right now, you're gonna end up with a really dry cheese. So you need to just let gravity and time do its thing. But we're gonna come back in 1 hour and then we're gonna twist and press. So my bread has been proofing for a couple hours and we got a little poof, a little fluff. It's alive, there's some bubbles. Now I'm gonna transfer it over to a peel so we can bake it. Before we put it in the oven, I'm gonna give it a few marks with the dowel to try and get that quintessential Panis Quadratus shape. I'm going to very gently. I don't wanna deflate the bubbles we created during the fermentation, so I'm gonna try and be gentle. Awesome. And now I'm gonna make our imprints with the dowel. Now the original bread had like a little hole in the middle, but we're just gonna go with the dowels. I feel like this is gonna make it really easy to break the bread after it's baked, you know, because it's already got these impressions. And now I'm going to put this in the oven to bake. Here we go. Okay, so my curds have been hanging out for an hour and we just let them naturally drain, and you can see they already look a lot drier. You can press this and age it, throw it in a salt brine. We're gonna eat this fresh, so I'm gonna season it up right now, right here. I'm gonna sprinkle in some salt. I'm waiting to do it now because so much of the liquid is gonna press out. So if we had put it in earlier, we would have just lost that salt. So now's a good time. But if you were gonna like age this, you could press it and then have it hang out in brine or age it like straight into salt. But we're gonna eat this today. So seasoned it up, and now I'm gonna press it to just like help remove the remaining moisture. I'm gonna twist up this cheesecloth and then weigh it down. Now the Romans, they actually would use wicker baskets or even a ceramic mold to separate the whey from the cheese. They actually found a mural in Pompeii of the whey separating from the cheese in a wicker basket. But we've got colanders now. So I'm gonna just let this hang out. This can go for a couple of hours or even overnight if you want a firmer cheese. But we're gonna get back to it in a little bit, and now I'm gonna finish up my bread. We got our bread out of the oven. Sometimes the bakery would use a baking stamp to put their emblem on it as a way of branding and to even signify if the bread was kosher. All right, so let me check out our cheese. This has been pressing this whole time, so it's firmed up quite a bit. And I'm gonna just try and flip it out on this plate so we can get a nice slice. So you can see how firm it's gotten, but it's still pretty soft. It's just like flipping a cake. You gotta do it with confidence. I don't know how much confidence I have. All right, here we go. So look at that. It totally just set up in no time at all. And I guess let's break into our bread, make a little cheese plate, Pompeii style. I'm gonna follow these ridges, get a nice hunk of bread. And they would normally serve this up with figs, mint, walnuts, so we have all of the accoutrements. And let me get a bit of this cheese. I'm gonna make like a toast, you know, like an ancient toast. Get it on there. Look at that. Really nice, dense texture, but still crumbly. It's a fresh cheese, you know? All right, so I got my fig. I love figs. I call them jam bags. We got some walnuts. Let me sprinkle it with a little bit of mint. A fancy toast. You know what? Let's just put it all on there. This is, if I was in Pompeii, this is how I would do it. I wonder if they brunch there, right? This could be on a brunch menu. Let's tear open a jam bag even. Nice. A little bit of sweetness. This is gonna be a big bite. All right, I'm gonna going in there. Sorry guys. So the cheese is really mild. It's a lot like a farmer's cheese. Creamy, but you can still feel the curds because it's not aged at all. A little bit crumbly, almost like a cottage cheese, but a little bit tighter. The bread is super nutty from that spelt flour, but it's also a little bit dense because it's just leavened with sourdough. But the figs add a nice sweetness. Altogether, it's a nice piece of toast. I would do this. I would brunch with this. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe. And if there are any vintage or ancient recipes that you think would be really cool for us to check out, let us know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.